Alphabet murders. In the early 1970s, in a quiet corner of upstate New York, a pattern began to emerge that no one wanted to believe. 3 young girls, 3 matching sets of initials, 3 bodies left in towns whose names began with the same letter. To this day, more than 50 years later, no one has ever been charged with their murders. This is the story of the Alphabet murders. Rochester, New York, in the early 1970s, was a working-class city built on manufacturing and quiet neighborhoods. Kodak and Xerox anchored the local economy. Families lived close together. Children walked to corner stores alone, and doors were often left unlocked. It was the kind of place where a 10-year-old girl could be sent to run an errand without a second thought. That sense of safety would not survive the decade. Between November 1971 and November 1973, 3 girls disappeared from the streets of Rochester. Each was found dead within days. Each had been sexually assaulted and strangled, and each shared something strange.
Their first and last names began with the same letter: Carmen Colon, Wanda Walkowicz, Michelle Maenza. Stranger still, the towns where their bodies were discovered seemed to echo that same pattern. Carmen was found in Churchville. Wanda was found in Webster. Michelle was found in Macedon. 3 girls, 3 matching initials, 3 matching towns. The press called it the double initial murders. Locals came to know it by a darker name: the Alphabet murders. The first to disappear was Carmen Colon. On November 16, 1971, the 10-year-old vanished from a street near her Rochester home. Witnesses later came forward describing something disturbing: a young girl, naked from the waist down, running along the shoulder of what is now Interstate 490, waving her arms for help. Investigators believe as many as 100 drivers may have passed her that day. No one stopped. 2 days later, 2 teenage boys riding bicycles near Churchville, a small town roughly 20 miles southwest of Rochester, came across a body in a ditch beside the road. At first, they thought it was a broken doll. It was Carmen. An autopsy determined she had been raped and strangled by hand, facing her attacker. The murder shook Rochester. In early 1972, 5 massive
billboards went up along the city's expressways, each showing Carmen's photograph beneath the words, "Do you know who killed Carmen Colon?" A reward of $6,000 was offered. Tip lines rang for months. None of it led anywhere. For a while, it seemed as though Carmen's murder might remain an isolated, unsolved tragedy, one more name added to a growing list of cold cases. Then, 17 months later, it happened again. On the afternoon of April 2nd, 1973, 11-year-old Wanda Walkowicz left her home on the east side of Rochester to buy groceries for her family. She was a quiet, responsible girl who had taken on extra duties at home after her father died of a heart attack years earlier. She bought what her mother needed and was last seen walking home with the bag in her arms. She never made it back. The next morning, a New York State trooper on routine patrol found her body at a rest stop along Route 104 in Webster, a town nearly 7 miles from where she'd last been seen.
Like Carmen, Wanda had been sexually assaulted and strangled. But this time, investigators noticed a key difference. She had been strangled from behind, not from the front. It was a small detail, but it would matter a great deal later. For now, what struck Rochester police was the pattern staring back at them. 2 girls, matching initials, bodies found in towns that opened with the same letter as their own names. Officially, detectives were cautious about calling it a connection. Privately, a sergeant was pulled from the Colon investigation and reassigned to the new task force formed around Wanda's murder. The city was on edge. Parents began keeping their children inside. If your child's name happened to carry the same first and last initial, the fear became personal. 7 months later, Rochester's nightmare returned a third time. On November 26, 1973, 11-year-old Michelle Maenza left school just after 3:20 in the afternoon to walk to a nearby shopping plaza. Her mother had accidentally left her purse behind in a store there days earlier, and Michelle had offered to retrieve it. Classmates watched her cross the street alone, heading toward the plaza. She never arrived home. Her family reported her missing that evening. 2 days later, her body was found in a ditch in Macedon, a town roughly 20 miles northeast of Rochester. She had been strangled with a ligature. Unlike Carmen, she was found clothed. An autopsy revealed she had eaten a hamburger sometime before she died, evidence that whoever took her may have spent time with her first, perhaps trying to gain her trust.
In a detail that would haunt the family for years, Michelle's own uncle later revealed that he had seen her walking that day and offered her a ride, which she declined, not realizing, moments later, someone else would not give her the choice. At her funeral, her father told mourners simply, "She was a sweet little girl. She didn't fight much." With Michelle's death, there was no longer any real debate. 3 girls, 3 sets of double initials, 3 towns beginning with those same letters. When a Rochester police captain was asked directly whether he believed the same man had killed all 3 girls, he offered a measured but telling answer. He wasn't fully convinced, but he strongly suspected they were looking for the same person. The investigation that followed would stretch across 5 decades, pulling in dozens of suspects and theories,
and closing exactly none of them. One of the earliest suspects was Carmen's own uncle, Miguel Colon, a man with a criminal record who left for Puerto Rico not long after her murder. He was questioned repeatedly. No charges ever followed. Years later, a far more chilling name surfaced, Kenneth Bianchi, who would later become infamous as one of the so-called Hillside Stranglers, responsible for a string of murders in California in the late 1970s. Bianchi had lived in Rochester at the time of the Alphabet murders and worked as an ice cream vendor, a job that put him in direct, casual contact with neighborhood children. Investigators looked closely at him. No physical evidence ever tied him to the case. Then in 2011, a name emerged that seemed almost too fitting. Joseph Naso, a 77-year-old man arrested in Reno, Nevada, was charged with murdering 4 women in California between 1977 and 1994, each victim's first and last name sharing the same initial, just as in Rochester. Naso was a New York native who had lived in Rochester in the early 1970s and frequently traveled between the 2 states. For a moment, it seemed as though the Alphabet killer might finally have a face. But DNA testing quietly ended that theory. Genetic evidence recovered from Wanda Walkowicz's body did not match Naso. He was convicted in 2013 for the California murders and sentenced to death. But Rochester's case remained exactly where it had been for 4 decades, open. More recently, some investigators and true crime authors have pointed toward a different man entirely, a Rochester resident who was later imprisoned for over 30 years after raping an 11-year-old girl in 1986, and subsequently held under civil confinement due to being deemed too dangerous for release. Some researchers believe he may be responsible for the deaths of Wanda and Michelle, though not necessarily Carmen, whose murder shows enough differences that some experts believe it may have been committed by someone else entirely. That theory tones on a detail that has quietly become the case's last
Real hope. Physical evidence. Nearly all forensic material connected to Carmen's and Michelle's murders has been lost or destroyed over the decades that followed. But semen recovered from Wanda Walkowicz's body has survived, preserved, and periodically re-examined as DNA technology has advanced. It remains to this day the only physical evidence left from any of the 3 cases. Whether it will ever be enough to identify a killer is impossible to say. As one state police investigator put it years ago, the hope that the case might someday be solved never fully goes away. It's part of what keeps investigators returning to a file that refuses to close. More than 50 years have passed since Michelle Maenza's funeral drew to a close in a small Rochester church. Carmen Colon, Wanda Walkowicz, and Michelle Maenza rest today in the same cemetery, a short distance from one another,
in a city that has never stopped wondering who took them. Some researchers still argue the matching initials were nothing more than a grim coincidence. 3
unrelated tragedies dressed up by fear and media attention into something more sinister than it truly was. Others believe just as firmly that a single predator moved carefully through Rochester for 2 years, selecting his victims by a private, almost ritualistic logic that made sense only to him. What remains beyond dispute is this: 3 children left home on ordinary days, expecting to come back. None of them did, and whoever was responsible for what happened next has never been named, never been arrested, and as far as the public record shows, has never answered for it. The file on the Alphabet murders is still open. Somewhere, the evidence that could finally close it may still be waiting to be matched.